Cromwell closed his eyes, bracing for the final blow, as the executioner raised his axe high. Once one of the most powerful men in England, he was now moments away from meeting the Reaper. The crowd held its breath as the blade sliced through the air, but not through Thomas. The executioner shuffled slightly. This never usually happened to Thomas Cromwell. When it came to being king, Henry VIII was pretty unpredictable. He was a force of nature driven by desires that could change on a whim, and no one knew that better than Thomas Cromwell, his chief minister. A skilled lawyer and a proponent of English Reformation, Cromwell shepherded in many of the changes to the English government and helped arrange the annulment of the king's first marriage. This also included the formation of a new English church. This kind of power doesn't come without its risks, though, and by 1540 Cromwell had made many enemies. And when he fell hard. Cromwell had made an enemy of Anne Boleyn, Henry's fiery second wife, and orchestrated her execution, which incidentally won the king's favor. But this next move proved to be fatal. After arranging a disastrous third marriage to Anne of Cleves, Cromwell was accused of treason by enemies, stripped of his titles, and sentenced to death. Eyewitnesses report that the executioner took 3 swings to sever his head, raising the possibility that the execution was drawn out to punish Cromwell, no doubt pleasing his enemies. One who wasn't pleased, the king, who was said to deeply regret losing his most skilled advisor. But time marched on, and so did execution methods. Number 19, Margaret Dixon. In 1724, the Green Market of Edinburgh was a popular marketplace, but it also served a darker purpose, hosting public executions regularly. And one victim was Margaret Dixon, a fishwife whose husband had recently joined, or rather been forced to join, the Royal Navy. Margaret was forced to find work at the local inn, where she got up to some indiscretions. It wouldn't do to have a 1-year-old baby after her husband got back from a 3-year hitch, so she left her out-of-wedlock child on the banks of the River Tweed. The baby's body was found, Dixon was fingered, and was quickly condemned to hang in the public square for murder most foul. But there was a big twist coming to this story. She was hanged and pronounced dead, likely to the cheers of onlookers, and her body was to be given to medical students for dissection. But after an altercation with her family, which believed her innocent, her body was turned over for burial, and that's when the family heard something odd. Noises were coming from inside of her coffin. She was alive, having survived her hanging. Now this created a paradox, as her sentence hadn't fully been carried out. There was nothing that could be done except to set her free and let her return to her husband for a really awkward conversation. Hopefully her family's beliefs about her character were more accurate than the law. A once-in-a-lifetime situation? Maybe not. Number 18, Anne Green. Nearly a century earlier, in 1650, Anne Green found herself condemned to an equally harrowing fate. As a domestic maid in the home of a justice of the peace, Anne's life took a dark turn after an affair with the judge's teenage grandson. When she suffered a miscarriage, she tried desperately to keep it hidden, but the remains were discovered, and Anne became the scapegoat. Accused of infanticide, with her powerful employer leading the charge, her fate seemed sealed. Even a midwife's testimony that the fetus was stillborn, too underdeveloped to survive, couldn't save her. She was quickly convicted and sentenced to hang. Justice was blind, but maybe a higher power wasn't. She was hanged at Oxford Castle, with a soldier even trying to speed up her death by hitting her with the butt of his rifle. After she was pronounced dead, she was turned over to a physician for dissection, and they discovered that she had a faint pulse. This led to a series of experiments to try to revive her, including bloodletting with leeches and a tobacco smoke enema. Basically a 17th century healing hack TikTok would totally overhype. Anne eventually woke up, fully recovered, and was soon pardoned. This was helped by the fact that the judge who masterminded her hanging had died only 3 days later, so there was no one to protest, and she wound up living another 15 years. But no English criminal facing the gallows had the luck of this man. Number 17, John Smith. No, not that one, although he did not treat Pocahontas well in real life. This rogue was a London burglar in the late 17th and early 18th century, and his life of crime eventually sent him to meet his fate. It didn't take too much to get sentenced to death in those days, and in 1705 he was sent to the gallows. He seemed oddly unconcerned by this, and somehow managed to survive hanging from his neck for 15 minutes. Eventually the crowd, probably bored, called out for mercy and he was cut down. He recovered and he was given a formal reprieve, with authorities hoping he would turn over a new leaf. Yeah, not so much. Within a year, Smith was back to his old ways. He was acquitted on his next trial, and the third time he was likely to be convicted, the judge died right before the trial started. It seemed like fate was on his side, so he decided to try his luck one more time. In 1727, he was convicted of theft, and while most agreed his theft of a padlock was part of a larger conspiracy to burgle a warehouse, they weren't trying their luck at the gallows again. Smith was sentenced to transportation, and he was packed on a ship bound for Virginia, where his fate is unknown but probably involved at least a few more crimes. But to the south in France, they weren't nearly